Dear God, help us to step out of our lives as they are and look at them from outside for a moment as we consider what it is you'd have for us. Amen. So over and over in the Gospel of Matthew, we had a reading from Matthew today. Jesus makes the point that the deep connection of the fledgling community that he is assembling one at a time is the most important thing in the world, and that those who want to be part of it are called to do everything in their power to nourish and strengthen the bonds that hold them all together. Nothing is to get in the way of that, not their quarrels, not their rivalries. If one goes astray, they're to leave the rest of the flock and go in search of that single one. Listening to Jesus say all of this, Peter, his disciple, becomes concerned about what exactly will be required of him. He's looking for a goal post, a limit to how far he has to go. He's like the lawyer who once asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Not to find out who he could help, but in order to be able to keep the bar of doing good as low as possible. Lord, he asks, "How often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" asks Peter. He's no doubt thinking that 7 is a lot of times, more times than most people will forgive someone else. Well, Jesus will have none of it. "I tell you, not 7, but 70 times 7, he says. Well, thinking about that just wears me out. Say you have a lunch date with a friend and you have to clear your calendar to see her, and then you show up 10 minutes early and you wait and find that you've been stood up. And you leave after a half hour thinking, well, she better have a good excuse. And later that afternoon, she calls, and she is all contrition. She was looking in the wrong appointment book and just then remembered her appointment with you. "Can we still do it?" she wants to know. "Of course," you say, putting your feelings aside, and you set another date, and the whole thing happens all over again. Forgiving somebody once is one thing, but are you going to give her a third chance? Wouldn't that make you feel played? How about 70 times 7? Come on. We prefer relationships where what we are willing to give is matched by what the other is willing and able to give too, right? Who wants a one-way relationship where one person does all the giving? That's the part of us Jesus is speaking to in this passage this morning. The part that lives by common sense and common courtesy and expects the same from everybody else. So as he often does, Jesus answers Peter's question with a parable, a story about a king who wants to settle accounts with his servants, many of whom owe him money. And he begins with one who owes him a tremendous debt, and that man begs for additional time to pay. It is granted by the merciful Lord. But that man goes out and demands a small amount he is owed by someone else, who in turn begs for the same grace his debt holder had been given. And this guy, who had just been forgiven a big debt, refuses. Then he's summoned by his Lord and excoriated for not passing on the same graciousness. So God will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart, Jesus says at the end. Now, on the surface, this is a lesson about the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or more exactly, do unto others as you would have God do unto you, because if you do not forgive your brother from your heart, then God will have you hauled off to jail and throw away the key. That's in the story too. Well, frankly, that reading of the story leaves me kind of cold. I mean, if the only reason to forgive your neighbor is to save your own neck, to get forgiveness for myself, then it's not something that you or I will do out of love, right? It's something I'm doing out of fear. Does that sound like Jesus to you? I don't think so. That's not how I understand that he operated. We need to look more closely at this parable to discover what it's really about, maybe. The story starts out well, but ends poorly. What made the servant so wicked, unable to forgive a mere fraction of the tremendous amount of debt he himself had been forgiven? If we are healthy, sensitive human beings, we find the power to forgive by our own experience of forgiveness, don't we? And we have all been forgiven freely by somebody. Barbara Brown Taylor once made this point, saying, quote, "Someone has chosen to wipe our slate clean when we have merited less. They decided to forgive us because they decided that what was most important was our relationship, not the damage we have done, nor the anger that they have felt toward us." That's what real forgiveness is about. Pure, unadulterated grace. But we, all of us who have known pure forgiveness, also know that there are imposters lurking about. Sometimes people merely overlook another's faults or make excuses for them and then call it forgiveness. They hide their real feelings in order to avoid a fight, and then they just call it forgiveness. They learn how to say things that sound forgiving while the state of their hearts bear little resemblance to their words. We're all guilty of this at one time or another, right? Forgiveness is a complicated business. The wonderful preacher and teacher Fred Craddock tells a simple story of a 6-year-old boy whose mother asked him to stop running through the house because he might stumble and fall and hurt himself and break something. So, of course, he ran and stumbled and fell and broke a vase. His father saw it all happen, picked him up, dusted him off, and said, "Don't worry about it. It's just a vase, pal." His mother, however, knelt down and gathered up the shattered pieces and said softly, "It wasn't just a vase. It was my favorite vase. My mother gave it to me, her mother gave it to her, and I had looked forward to giving it to my children." And she wept, and the little boy wept, and the mother took him in her arms and hugged him, and he hugged her back. Who forgave here in this case, asks Fred Craddock, the father or the mother? Forgiveness confronts the reality of what has happened, but decides to break a cycle of coldness, indifference, or maybe, when the stakes are high, violence and vengeance even. Decides to be free of it. Of course, Desmond Tutu and South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission back in the 1990s was all about that writ large. There's never been an experience of forgiveness like that. However, the story of the little boy and his parents hits home for all of us, does it not? I'm concerned about such domestic matters because that is where most damage in life, occurs. And there is a lot that passes for forgiveness these days that is not forgiveness at all, but a kind of indifference, as I was saying earlier, in which we dismiss people who hurt us from our lives by forgiving them because it's less painful than dealing with them directly. And then, as often happens, we have less and less to do with them until finally there is nothing between us at all. Sharon Aberley of Flagstaff, Arizona, once bore witness to the ache of dealing with a wound by not dealing with it until it was way too late. I'm wanting to share her story here because she found a way around that, a way that I find genuine and genuinely moving, and I commend it to all of us. Here's how she spoke of this experience. 20 years after my father's death, Sharon says, I decided to try to figure out what had gone so horribly wrong between us. My parents divorced when I was a baby, and I saw my father only sporadically while growing up. We were never close enough to fight. I love that line. We were never close enough to fight, and consequently never had the chance to make up. During my search for reconciliation, I came across a meditation exercise for healing unresolved issues. In a comfortable place, the exercise instructed, relax and visualize a sacred space. Then ask your higher self to join you there, along with the person who has caused you the most pain and his or her higher self. I went out to the edge of a cornfield on a beautiful autumn day. The sun was warm on my back, crows and geese called overhead, and the dried stalks seemed to whisper to me in the breeze. I settled into a comfortable position and closed my eyes. Immediately, as if he had been waiting for me, my father appeared. There were no preliminaries. I asked the question I'd wanted to ask him my whole life. Why didn't you love me? The answer he gave was the one answer I'd never thought of, and ironically, the one that made the most sense. I didn't know how, he said. I didn't know how. Well, I'm sad to say that I believe that evil exists and that it can take a person captive. I've been slow coming to this, but I want to hurry along and say that most people are doing their best in life, doing their best with what they've been dealt, even our parents. For some people with few inner resources, no models for loving relationships at hand, just the business of dealing with other people every day is monumental, and it inevitably leads to coldness or worse. God bless them. Nelson Mandela, was imprisoned by the white supremacist government of South Africa for 27 years. However, in a rare example of justice triumphing, and we need these examples today, don't we? He became South Africa's president. Well, something nearly as gobsmacking as that happened when President Mandela drew up a guest list for his inauguration. He not only put his white jailer on it, he designated him as an honored guest. Well, that kind of thing doesn't happen magically, does it? A wronged person has to put the righting of a relationship above one's knee-jerk desire for retribution. Here's how Desmond Tutu describes this kind of forgiveness/justice. He speaks of it in his memoir, No Future Without Forgiveness. There he goes into great detail about how retributive justice based on retribution, is not justice at all. Not even for the victim, he says. It is instead a counterfeit. In the face of that, Tutu poses the following idea. He says, we contend that there is another kind of justice, restorative justice, which was characteristic of traditional African jurisprudence. Here, the central concern is not retribution or punishment. The central concern is the healing of breaches, the redressing of imbalances, the restoration of broken relationships, a seeking to rehabilitate both the victim and the perpetrator, who should be given the opportunity to be reintegrated into the community that he has injured by his offense. Now, once again, this is not a simple matter. It's not just putting whitewash over another person's crimes. It takes into account that there are more than two agents involved in any interpersonal matter gone astray. There's the perpetrator and the victim and the creator who made both of them. And it takes seriously that the one who made them both and who, looking at every situation in the long run, not the short, is working to make things right, and right for everyone. Not just the two, but for everybody who's affected by the breach. Restorative justice remember is a three-legged stool, victim, perpetrator, and creator of them both. And here is the best story I know to illustrate the power behind that, because it is the strongest force, this power I'm speaking of, on the face of the earth. See if you don't agree with me. During the deepest, darkest days of apartheid, when the white supremacist government of South Africa tried to shut down opposition by canceling a political rally, Archbishop Desmond Tutu declared that he would hold a church service instead. St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town filled with worshipers. Outside the cathedral, hundreds of police gathered. It was a show of force intended to intimidate the worshipers. As Tutu was preaching, the authorities brazenly entered the cathedral, fully armed. This was new and bold and terrifying for those who were worshiping. The police lined the walls around them. Some took out notebooks and wrote down Bishop Tutu's words. But Bishop Tutu would not be intimidated. He confidently proclaimed that, quote, the evil and oppression of apartheid would not prevail. And you know, at that moment, he was probably the only person on the face of the earth who believed those words. He decided then not to ignore the police, but to address them directly. You are powerful, he said. You are very powerful, but you are not gods. And I serve a God who will not be mocked. Then he came out from behind the pulpit, and he softened. His classic smile, there's nobody who smiled like Desmond Tutu. His classic smile lit up his face in the whole room. So he said, since you have already lost, speaking to the perimeter of police, since you have already lost, we are inviting you to come and join the winning side. And the place erupted. The police, totally nonplussed, scrambled out the back, lest anyone think that they had accepted his invitation. Dancing and singing began in earnest throughout the whole cathedral. The struggle wasn't done. No, it was only beginning. There was much to be done to turn losing into winning for the anti-apartheid forces. But in a sense, the outcome of the struggle was sealed at that moment in that cathedral, in a place of worship, which had become a field of battle, which it always is. And the only weapon the winning side had was the teachings of Jesus found in this morning's Bible text. What then is forgiveness? And what is it not? Here is what Desmond and Mafo Tutu say about it in our Southminster Reads book, the Book of Forgiving. Forgiveness does not relieve someone of responsibility for what they have done. Forgiveness does not erase accountability. It is not about turning a blind eye or even turning the other cheek. It is not about letting someone off the hook or saying it is okay to do something monstrous. Forgiveness is simply about understanding that every one of us is both inherently good and inherently flawed. Within every hopeless situation and every seemingly hopeless purpose lies the possibility of transformation.